I can't promise success. I can't promise you that you're going to have the results you want, but I know you won't have the results you want if you don't try.
A quick interruption to remind you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better. Hey, it's Ari Santiago, President, CEO of IT Direct. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Made in America podcast. Today, I've got Melissa Biggs from DNB Lobby in New Haven. Melissa is a lobbyist who's been working on behalf of manufacturers for 6 years and been lobbying for 12 years. I'm really excited to hear her feedback and what's going on in the state of lobbying in Connecticut. Melissa, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Melissa, it is the Made in America podcast. So we're going to start off with our same two questions. What do you make? And why do you make it?
So I make it easier for people to interact with members of the General Assembly. And I make it because I do enjoy allowing people to help improve public policy for state legislature.
Well, that's a pretty concise answer. I appreciate that. Yeah, respect. So very well done. So, but let me ask you this question. Why? I mean, how long have you been a lobbyist? And were you doing any other kind of law before that? So we said 12 years of lobbying, but anything in law before that?
No, I actually lobbied my way through law school. Originally, I decided I wanted to be a lobbyist when I was in high school. And I thought you had to have your legal degree to pursue it. So I decided that I would intern in my undergrad and then I'd go to law school, continuing my job through my internship. And I've stayed there ever since.
You decided in high school you wanted to be a lobbyist. Listen, that's awesome. There's not that many people, right, who decide something that they want to do when they're young and then see it through. So what happened in high school? Did they change the lunch schedule and they wouldn't listen to you and you're like, I need to have a lobbyist. There are no high school lobbyists, but I'm going to change the world. Like, what happened?
Honestly, it was learning that being a lobbyist is not what everyone thinks about. It is, I would say I'm an educator for legislators. I'm learning about new things every day. And that's what really attracted me to it. It's something where I can work on my feet, learn about new things, and try and really educate people. So it
was the educational aspect. I mean, in high school, you were like, I really want to educate politicians. that was your mission in life. I'm going to try and climb that mountain.
So I really actually enjoy research. I love it. So yeah, it really fascinated me that I could learn just a little bit about a lot of different topics.
So I heard a rumor that you have a nickname of Steak. Is this research background where your Steak nickname comes from? Okay.
Because I think it's important to know everything that's going on in the General Assembly. So I love reading up on like what we call OLR reports, which are research reports about different topics. So even if it's not something I'm working on.
OLR reports?
OLR reports. So
OLR.
Yeah, we use every acronym you can imagine.
Listen, I'm in IT. We'll go tit for tat on the acronyms on that.
We just need to make a glossary of every industry's.
For sure.
But I really enjoy learning about different things and how it affects everyone's everyday life. So yes, I'm the Steak. Yes. Give me a topic. I'm going to research the heck out of it.
So if you're the Steak, is there other nicknames that go along with the Steak? Like, how does that work? And how does loving researching turn into Steak?
So we called my partner, Paul. He is the sizzle in our company just because he is a really great social guy. He's really fun to be around, very charismatic. So he is the sizzle. I am the Steak. And we are a great combination because you get both of us.
You get the sizzle and the Steak. Because the sizzle without the Steak, no good. And the same as the other in reverse. I will tell you, by the way, I think you're getting shortchanged a little bit because we've had a chance to chat for a little bit before this podcast. You got plenty of sizzle, Melissa. Plenty of sizzle.
I appreciate that.
So let's kind of keep going on the educational front. I think that a lot of manufacturers are concerned that they're not getting heard. Yep. And so before we kind of get in those details, which I know you're excited to get into, do you think that lobbying works? Do you think that it makes a real impact?
Yes, but you can't do lobbying on one issue. So you can't say, I'm against this policy issue. This is the only time I'm going to talk to my legislator to tell them I hate what they're doing. I think that is ineffective. I think when you engage with your local legislators on a day-to-day basis, that's where you're going to get the benefits. That's where they're going to learn from your perspective. But it does require a little bit more time, and you have to have substance on more than one issue.
I mean, when you say a day to day, I think we probably don't mean actually day to day. But I mean, if I could just sort of say, if I would make an analogy on that, right? It's about building relationships, right? If you only ever call your customer when you want them to buy something, or you only talk to them when there's a problem, the relationship's going to sour pretty quickly because there's no basis for a relationship. So if I can put some words in your mouth, that what you're basically alluding to the fact is, if we're only reaching out to the state capitol when we have a problem, it's much harder to get them to listen.
Correct. Yeah. And they're your local legislator for a reason. The goal is that you're meeting with them when they get elected, that you're participating in the campaigns. And I realize everyone is wearing multiple hats, so it's easier said than done. But if you can start small before session even begins and reach out and say, hey, this is a company in your district. This is what I do and this is what's important to me. They're going to really respect that.
I mean, do you have... So I'm trying to figure out how I want to go down the road on this thing. So, I mean, let's talk about this. Is that part of what you do in your work for CMC, is educate people on how to effectively lobby?
It's also to help establish that connection, because I find a lot of people don't even know who their legislators are. And I say, if you have a business, you have a delegation, because not only do you have the legislators for where you live and reside, but you should reach out to the legislators of where your company resides and where your employees reside. So you should really take note of where your employees live, because their legislators should care about your business as well.
So, before I ask more details on that, let's just kind of give the audience a little bit of background, right? So you've been lobbying for manufacturing for 6 years. So just explain to us where you've been lobbying, who you've been doing it for, and what you're doing for manufacturing now.
Sure. So I represent the CMC. So that is the statewide collaborative of manufacturers. It's a lot of organizations from across the state, including CBIA. And our goal is to reach out to their memberships to inform them about what's going on in the state. So
So just really quickly, so for people that have been watching the podcast, we had Christy Pentima, the new president CEO of CBIA on. Correct. We had Joe Brennan, the person that preceded him on as well. And they've talked about very successfully the Connecticut Manufacturers Collaborative that CBIA worked together with Concept to convene, which is really the leaders of all the different state associations, SMA, NHMA or Manufacturer CT, EMA, and others, that kind of bring them together to kind of help, everyone talks about the alphabet soup in Connecticut, but really to help have a larger voice that's speaking together, we can be heard more than, in speaking individually.
The goal was a one-stop shop, is that we will all have a collective priority list. Not saying that each organization doesn't have their own separate goals and priorities, but that legislators can come to the CMC and ask them for advice on what's the best policies to bring forward.
So actually, let me talk about that for a little bit. So do you go to all the CMC meetings?
I go to almost all, yeah. And
so when they're there, are they talking about what are the policies that we all can agree on and bring forward? And is it mostly legislative focused?
No. So recently we've started talking about our legislative priorities, but through this whole pandemic, we've been talking about how we can work collaboratively with the administration, work together to make sure that we are supporting manufacturers across the state. So the CMC's mission is much broader than lobbying. I like to go in as many meetings as possible because I think it's always important to know the overall atmosphere of what's going on so you can have some context moving forward.
Going back to your educational concept, right? If you don't have the information, you can't educate on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what got you to CMC? How did you get kind of hooked up with that?
Honestly, so I worked with CHASM before, which was a smaller group of these manufacturing associations, and they kind of had just an open interviews at the LOB. And so my firm was up, and so we participated and we won the bid. What
are some of the successes that, DNB has had for manufacturers in Connecticut?
So we've had actually a lot. So our goal is working with what the priorities are, and there's a wide variety of things that manufacturers care about. But in the past, we've been very specific on workforce development. So including how do we get more teachers in the technical schools? How do we get the technical schools the tools they need to succeed? One thing we talked about was the silos. So we did Colin Cooper for the manufacturing ahead. We've talked about the apprenticeship ratios has been an issue in the past. So those are some of the bigger issues. Technical schools and trying to get teachers into the technical schools has been a huge focus as well. So we've reduced the history that you need going in. Before, you needed 8 years experience plus your teaching certification to go into a tech school to teach. We moved that down to 5, hoping to get more applicants involved.
Has that worked?
It's been difficult because it's only been a few years in, and I think we're still having some challenges getting teachers in there, but we're still considering every day how we can help get more teachers in the tech schools.
A lot of manufacturers are wondering about the economic climate in general, right? And what we can do to sort of improve the the level of the straight playing field, right? Not that we all don't like the manufacturing funds and the all that sort of money, but what can we do to sort of improve the environment overall? Is that something that you get interested in or involved in?
We haven't got involved so much as the entire state's financial outlook, because I know there are people who are really concerned with the type of contracts that we have with the unions, with the pension systems, and they want to know the nitty-gritty of the state budget and the state finances. That's not something CMC has taken a position on. However, some members have expressed concerns or have testified on their own on it.
So is that mainly your job? Let's actually ask about that. So how do you execute what you do for CMC? So if I'm a manufacturer, right, I care about the manufacturing environment. I know that you're out there working for the collaborative and working collaboratively with CBIA, kind of pushing manufacturing ideas forward. How does it work? What do you do? What's the value I should be looking at that we would be getting from this?
So the difference is from what people think a lobbyist does and what I actually do is my job is not to be your voice. My job is to get you a seat at the table. So if you are working with me, my goal is to get you into the right meeting at the right time rather than speaking for you. So when you're not there, of course, I'm going to have your testimony or your testimonial about how a policy is going to impact you. But my goal is to get you into the building, connected to the right people to be able to make your point. Because ultimately, you know the subject matter much better than I will. So
the goal is just to get someone to be heard.
Yes.
Which means that you need manufacturers to come to be heard.
Correct. Which sounds like an awful topic. And I've heard people talk about their experience at the Capitol being long days where they've sat in a public hearing room where there was no room for 8 hours. And I understand. I'm there too. I understand it's not a fun topic. My goal is to try and give you a window of the time that you'll be at the hearing and when you're going to speak. My goal is to get you in and out as fast as possible and to make your time up there as efficient as possible. There are times where I have CMC members up there where I can set up meetings before the public hearing or after, so they're in the building, they're feeling like their time is being used. For example, if you come up to speak at a public hearing, your legislators might not be on that committee. So what we can do ahead of time is set up a meeting with them so they know you're there and what you're talking on.
Can you help someone understand if they wanted to do something like this? What is it like? Actually, and two things. I can tell from your voice, and we had the prep conversation and now, that people apparently don't like doing this, right? Because you're defensive on why we should be doing it in the first place. So I get that they must not like it. But maybe we need to talk about more, why is it important and how should they be thinking about it? That's number one. Let's start there. Why is it important and how should they be thinking about it?
This is your only time to be on record about legislation, is the public hearing process. So many legislators say, hey, we are there for as long as it takes. Public health had a hearing that ran 22 hours last year. So they're there until the job is done. So they're saying, if we're taking the time, you need to take the 3 minutes of testimony, come up and be with us and participate. For legislators, it's very important that you are on record. And I can tell you, most of the advocates for whatever proposal, especially if you're opposing it, they're going to be there. They're going to spend the time there. So it's important that you go up. Again, it hasn't been the most enjoyable experience for many people. The building is crazy. And with the pandemic, the public hearing process may change. We've moved to these listening sessions now, which are all virtual. So we may see some movement in the future. But if you're not up there, your voice will not be heard.
Is the hearing process the steak or the sizzle?
It's the steak.
Is it?
It is the steak because it's not as fun. You'll see some dramatic parts that go on the news and clips like that. But for the most part, it's a long, boring process. When I'm a lobbyist, I sit in the lobby a lot.
Thus, the name.
Thus the name. But it's not always so exciting and so fun, but it is necessary.
So how does the relationship development work, right? So, you're going to the hearing, you started off by saying you can't just go to I'll put these words in your mouth, but you basically said you can't just go to hearings and then they never hear from you otherwise.
Yep.
So that's why I asked you about the steak and the sizzle. So, because to me, then that's only some small part of the steak, because you're saying we need to engage in other areas. So how, as a manufacturer in Connecticut, should I be thinking about engaging in a way that's going to have an impact?
So elections are coming up. My idea would be that you would reach out to your legislators as soon as they get elected, invite them to your facility. And I realize everyone has protocol now that's different with guests and tours, but at least reach out to them and let them know who you are. Most of the people running for office, even the new ones, have all of their information online. I kind of try and do a spreadsheet. And so you can reach out to anyone who's trying to seek office right now. So my goal would be to start there. If you're waiting to session, you're almost waiting too long. But reach out, just say, hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm here for. Most legislators do not want to legislate blindly. And when I say that, I mean they don't want to institute policies where they don't know where the parties are or how it's going to impact real world. So they want your background, they want your expertise, but they need to know where to find that.
So why do you think there's such a bad reputation in the business community? I don't know, maybe it's even more statewide too, but in the business community about the legislator and legislature, and their ability to do anything meaningfully good.
You and I have talked about this a little bit. I think part of it is having a relationship with your legislator beyond an issue that you're concerned about. So oftentimes we hear about these hot button issues, and that's when the public speaks out. But I think you need to develop that relationship beforehand. And I also think it's important for people to realize they should be bringing solutions together. Legislators are not picking out issues just because, hey, I had a dream about this, I'm going to do it. They're actually hearing from constituents that want a certain policy. So it's not coming out of nowhere. So if you like it or dislike it, you need to combat that and say, this is why I would say don't vote for that. And it is effective if you communicate well.
It's effective. It's effective if you communicate well, meaning if I build the relationship and I get down the end of the road, it is effective, but I've got to invest the time up front is what you're saying?
And I realize I'm saying that to people who wear so many different hats and they don't have 5 minutes in their day. I get that.
Do people push back against you? I'm sensing that you got a lot of pushback on this idea.
No, but I think people think of politics as the last thing they need to worry about. I think they think of the General Assembly as, hey, out of sight, out of mind, I need to work on what's going in and out of my facility today.
Well, listen, I'm not going to speak for everyone. Well, I guess I'm about to actually when I say that. I think the feeling is like I'm out here busting my hump trying to get something done. And why on earth are you just going to continue to make this thing harder for me?
Yeah. And I think that's how a lot of people feel. But I think if we spend more time in the building being proactive, I think we'll get more reception.
If we spend more time being proactive, which implies that we're not doing that right now.
I think that we could individually meet more with our legislators, yes.
Is that more important than commissions? Because something that I've heard from a number of manufacturers who have thrown up their hands and said, I am tired of being on a commission, going to a committee, investing my time, putting in the energy, and then it sits on a shelf, nothing happens, they don't listen, they just ignore me. You know, that I think the biggest challenge and from a pushback perspective is that it's not that people don't want to engage. Some people don't want to engage, but it's that people who have engaged come back. You know, it's almost like you talk to somebody, right? They've been to the front lines.
Yep.
They come back, this glazed look in their eye, and they're like, don't go there. It's horrible. You know, it's just blood and guts. Thank God I'm not there, you know? And I've heard that from so many people and people that have been on the CBIA board who have said, I've volunteered for commissions. I've gone into the LOB. I've testified. I've done my part. And, you know, basically, you know, I just get the middle finger.
Yeah. And commissions are hard because I know that there's a lot of commissions out there. And that's one of the issues that the CMC has raised is that we have all these silos. So often we have these commissions that seem to overlap and are trying to do the same mission, but they're not talking to one another. And then the legislature is not talking to them and they just proceed to the next thing. So there is a lack of communication at times when it comes to these commissions from every direction. So I think that is an issue, and I see the fatigue that people have participating on them. Again, I'm going to recommend if you get offered a seat on a commission, you better take it because they're going to propose something that you may not like if you don't do it. And I'm also not going to promise that everyone has the best experience with their legislature, but I am going to say it's worth the effort.
Do you have a number of successes? Like, and I'm not sure how much you're allowed to share, and you know, you're a lawyer and blah blah blah. So, but I think, you know, people go after success when they see success.
Yep.
And they shy away from things when they feel like, you know, it's Sisyphus or whatever, pushing the boulder up the hill. So, you know, I think, could you share successes? Do you have examples of people who engaged their legislator
Yep.
or legislators and followed the practices that you've suggested and they've seen positive outcomes?
So as the CMC, we've collectively worked together on workforce development issues, and we've had a lot of progress. So for example, the technical school teacher shortage. One of our ideas was if we reduce the years experience from 8 to 5, we might get more applicants in the door. And the legislator was very receptive. We did have some pushback from people down the process, process, but the legislature understood where we were coming from and supported us and pushed it through. So I think when we develop niche topics like that in workforce development or apprenticeship ratios, that was an issue quite a few years ago that people brought up. And I know there's still some concerns about it, but when we brought that up, legislators had open minds and they were willing to listen and sit down and talk to us. So we've had successes throughout the years when we focus on our niche markets.
Do you think that we're more effective in getting business-friendly legislation done when we don't have supermajority rule and there's more diversity in the legislator body itself?
When there's more diversity, I think we get better policy across the board, but that even comes to the legislator is part-time. So you have to think about all of the occupations for the people who are running for office. So even if we had more manufacturers say, hey, I'm willing to run for office, I think that's a benefit because that's an experience they can bring in. And we've had quite a few manufacturers win office before, and it's been great. But that background certainly adds a great dynamic to the policies that are coming out. But like you said, diversity all the way around, I think, is beneficial for the
Is the part-time, this is a very sensitive topic right now, but is the part-time nature of our legislature, which I know not all states have that. In fact, I think the majority of states have full-time legislators. What, go ahead. Am I right about that?
It's a different dynamic in every state you go to. I have heard of some states who only have their legislator convene after hours. I think it's New Hampshire where it's like 5 to 7 they work. So every state does things a little different, but I think Connecticut is very unique with our sessions.
Unique in what way?
The way we run them. It's the Wednesday after the first Monday of a month to the Wednesday after the first Monday in May or June. So just the way that we set our calendar is very interesting, the way we call ourselves in for special session. And lately, you'll notice that committees have been working year round. So even if we're only in session for 4 to 6 months out of the year, some committees have been taking these forums that go all year round.
Does the unique nature, as you put it, the way we do it, and or the part-time nature of it have a negative impact on outcomes?
I don't think so, but I think it's really important that people don't forget about the summer and fall months. I think people realize, hey, I only need to worry about government during session. And I think the fall and summer months are a really important time to connect with legislators, think about the policies or changes we want, and propose them.
And that's where it comes down to this engagement effort. And so what, is the CMC taking a position, or can you help the CMC take a position to train people on how to do this engagement?
Yes. And last year, what we tried to do for Manufacturing Month is work with manufacturers who wanted to host tours of their local schools, and I would try and bring in their legislators. So my goal is if a company comes to me and they say, I want a tour of my facility with a legislator, I will do everything in my power to make sure the legislator is in there.
And so if I want my legislator to come to my facility, I should call you?
Yes.
Wow. Well, your phone number is going to be in these podcast notes. So ring. She's like, it's great. I bill by the hour. No. What else should we be thinking about in terms of how lobbying works? What are some of the misconceptions about what you do that you think people should really understand? Because listen, I don't think it's any surprise to you that the lobbyist profession probably doesn't have a terrific reputation.
A terrible reputation.
Yes.
We're quite awful.
Yes. Although ironically, there's not that many lobbyist jokes like there are lawyer jokes. You guys just get roped into the...
So here's the good one. So I'm in law school and we're doing an ethics course. And mind you, I was working at the time and my whole class knew what I did. So they showed us a graph meant to show us how mistrusted lawyers are. So they have this little chart and lawyers are second to last. Guess which was the last one?
Lobbyist.
Yeah, all of my fellow students made sure that my professor knew what I was doing.
Is that reputation deserved?
No, not at all. Because honestly, like I said, it is difficult to follow what goes on in the legislature. For a public hearing process, you have 5 days notice. So if you're not up at 8 a.m. looking at all the bills and the bulletin to figure out what's going on, you might miss an important day to really prepare yourself and organize yourself for testimony. So I think lobbyists are essential because the legislature does do a lot of action. You need someone watching that. And also it makes sure that you can participate and not take up your full day. So we're the good guys.
We're the good guys. Yeah, well, the good guys when you're on our side, I suppose, right? But how should a manufacturer think? You talked about earlier in the podcast about think about where your employees are. Yep. How can a manufacturer effectively leverage their full power? Their full influence, if you will, right? So if I'm a manufacturer and I've got 100 employees, right, that that's somewhere between 100 and 200 votes with, with spouses and so on and so forth. And my experience is most manufacturers, the people live generally not too far away from where they work, the majority of them. So how can I leverage that in a way that's legal, ethical, and effective?
So I haven't done a lot of work on training your employees or letting them know who you support. I think the better way to do that is to come up with a company profile, essentially, like a one-page document about who your employees are, how many employees you have, where your property tax value is, what city you're working in, and what you add to this state. I think that's important, especially if you're doing apprenticeships or any workforce development programs. It's important to publish that and let legislators know. So I would always advocate each company prepare just a simple 2-paragraph statement about who they are, what they do, and why they're important to the state of Connecticut.
And then do what with that?
Then they give it to their local legislators, and they give it to the legislators in the area who might not be their direct legislators, but the legislators who will care.
How would you know who legislators who care? Oh, just because they're
in that
tangentially related.
We'll take New Haven, for example. If you are in New Haven, say your business is in a separate district in New Haven than where you live, I would take the entire New Haven delegation and let them know what your company's doing, because chances are you're pulling employees from the entire city.
I mean, and then do you advocate for, recommend setting up meetings with these legislators? Like, hey, come by the facility. Let's talk. Like, what does an agenda for that meeting look like?
So I think the best agenda is no agenda. That you have a legislator come in your facility and you have small talk. And you just say, hey, how are you? What's your background? Get to know them as well so you can fully understand their perspective, because they might be coming from a different part of this, not a different part, but they may have grown up somewhere new, somewhere different. They might have a different occupation. So just get a chance to get to know them and let them get to know you. And that way you can build a relationship of trust.
And then how do you maintain that relationship of trust?
You should be talking to them regularly. So don't wait till you're very concerned about something and the news is covering it. Try and reach out to them on a regular basis. Say, hey, hope is well. I've been hearing about this bill. Just want to give you my backstory. Or, hey, I'm coming up to the building for this event. I'd love to meet with you before or after.
The way I'm thinking about this, by the way, feels like prospecting. You know what I mean? It was no, seriously, it's like trying to generate new business. You have some targets, and then you're just kind of reaching out and having communications and developing that relationship so that if and when they need one of our products or services, they think about us, and it sort of seems like the same approach. I
mean, you offer a unique perspective that legislators want to hear. They truly do. And only you can provide that information. I can help set everything up, but only you can give them that information, let them know who your employees are and why you are important.
Do you really think that they want to know?
Yes. I do. It is not a glamorous position being a legislator. I know everyone thinks it is. It is not. They have long days. It's not great pay. They all are there to make the state better. Their beliefs on how to do it may be unique, but I think they truly all want to see the state improve.
You're a true believer.
I am a true believer.
You're in there. That's why you wanted to do this in high school. And you think that these relationships, they'll be the relationships that matter. And that if we build these relationships, we can have a positive impact on the legislation that's being made through the process.
Exactly.
What are the CMC legislative priorities, and what's your role in helping shape or craft those?
So they are still in progress, so I'm not going to name them specifically because I know we're still working on fine-tuning them. But my job is to say how it could be effective and how we start introducing them. So whether it's setting up a conversation with the committee leaders or making sure that we know the relevant agencies that will be affected. Ultimately, every time you propose a bill, someone is going to be impacted. You're better off if you find out who's going to be impacted and if they're going to support it or oppose it before you even put it into the legislation.
Give me an example.
An example would be the teacher certification changes. So we went through and we didn't really talk. We talked with the technical schools, we talked to leadership, but in the middle of the session, the unions had some concerns that they flagged and raised. So it might have been easier for us to address those concerns before the bill had gone in and been officially drafted. I think you should always do your homework when it comes to legislation, meeting with the relevant agencies or interest groups beforehand, and at least say you've done that. Even if they don't agree with your statement, say, I've met with them, I know what they're going to say, and I'm prepared to address pass it.
And is that something that you do on behalf of?
It is.
And so we don't have to worry about doing that, because man, that sounds like this is a lot of time, Melissa. I
Exactly.
mean, you start off by saying we're busy, and then you're giving us a checklist like a mile long. We got to take care of.
No, but that's where my expertise comes in, is I know who's going to be in the building. I know who's going to represent those interest groups, so I can set up those meetings and have those conversations.
And so how does your relationships with the other interest groups on like competing issues come into play?
Oh, this is so fascinating about the building. We all share one cafeteria. So there's one great equalizer, and that's lunch. You might work against a person on a certain issue, and then you might work with them. Most lobbyists in the building don't take things personally. You know, you're doing your job, you're representing your interests. This is something that I believe firmly. You never lie in an issue, because you're going to be in that building. I hope to be in that building my entire life. So I'm going to present the facts. And if a legislator asks me what the opposition says, I'm going to let them know what that is as well. And most lobbyists use the same dynamic. They want to be open and honest. That way you're just saving everyone time, right? So we work collaboratively when we need to, and we're all friendly.
So you don't think that your penchant for telling the truth is a liability in your lobbyist career?
No.
It's an asset.
It's an asset.
And the relationships with other lobbyists, and the fact that legislators that you have to lobby on one issue, you may have to lobby on a completely separate issue. How do you balance that? You know, which client gets the more attention? How do you focus that information?
It's never usually that dynamic. It's what issue is popping up now. So there are times that in 5 minutes I'm working on 3 different issues. And that's what I love about my job, is that I get to do so much in a short amount of time. And you just learn to juggle. And it's a lot of fun. And there's a lot of legislators.
How do you, I mean, so there's a session, there's a short period of time. You're a mom, you're a wife, you got things you want to do, I assume, outside of just spending time at the LOB, though clearly you love that. How do you make that work?
Oh God, I don't know. Every year brings its own challenges. I work with a great team, and so we all try and support each other. We all have families, and we make it work. You're
there those late hours. I mean, listen, I have some flavor for lobbying that I know some people, and I mean there are some late nights, and I mean there's a little bit of like during session, especially as it heats up towards the end, and like things are going until midnight, 2, 3, 4 a.m. People are like sleeping at the LOB or.
So the worst is going for a late night session and then putting your kids on the bus, and then the bus driver looking at you like, "What did you do?"
Don't judge me, bus driver.
I swear I was working, and I get pulled over at least once a session when I'm driving home, because officers just don't expect someone to be on the road that late. And they're like, "What are you doing on these back roads?"
Yes, for those of you that don't know, Melissa lives way out in the middle of nowhere. Those of us that live in West Hartford don't really have those problems. That's funny. So you had talked about sort of meeting with leadership, and I think a lot of people who sort of keep general tabs on what's going on know that there's a pretty significant transition in leadership, in the legislature right now. So number one, can you just sort of educate the audience on what it is that I'm talking about?
Sure.
And then kind of transition from that into the impact you think it's going to have.
So altogether, we are facing, I think, 16 retirements across the Senate and House. 3 of them are out of the 4 leadership positions. We are losing our minority leader in the Senate, our minority leader in the House. Senator Fasano in the Senate, Representative Themis Claridis in the House, and we're also losing Speaker Joe Arasimowicz in the House. So 1 Democratic leader and 2 Republican leaders.
And just real quickly, for anyone that maybe doesn't fully understand, I'm among them, how important is leadership in terms of determining legislative process and procedure and what happens, and why should someone care that leadership is turning over?
They are everything. So even today they met together to talk about the governor's declaration for a public health emergency and how that was extended. So that was a committee only made up of leadership in the House, Senate, and then the Public Health Committee. So they set the tone, they set the calendar. For those that follow the Senate, a filibuster could mean everything. So even if the Senate Republicans don't have the opportunity to choose exactly what bill is on the agenda, they could filibuster a bill and speak on it for 5 hours and really slow down the business of the day. So they have a huge role in deciding what we do every year and how the dynamics are going to be between each party.
How has the relationship been between, the majority and minority leaders over the last decade?
I actually think they work relatively really well together. Of course, they're going to have different sides, but they're there together. And these are longstanding members of the General Assembly who have been there for years, and they've built these relationships like we're talking about with legislators so they can work beyond this one issue where they may disagree. So I think it is a great loss for the state of Connecticut. I think there are some great leaders that are looking to replace them, and I think that'll be great. So it'll be an interesting dynamic. One thing we don't talk about that I love to research is the session rules, and that really depends on how the public hearings are going to run and when the committees must vote on a bill and when the bill can get out and how it goes to the floor. These are rules that are decided by leadership and voted on the General Assembly within the first day of session. So I think new leadership has an opportunity to change our dynamic in the way we've done things in the past.
Do you think they will?
I think so. I think with the pandemic, we have to. With the public hearing process in the state of Connecticut, we tend to jam in the LOB, and there's a lot of bodies. So
that's probably not going to happen. What do you think is going to be the impact from a manufacturer's perspective to legislation and policy because of leadership changeover? Is this all sort of like wonky behind the scenes making of the sausage stuff, but in terms of those of us that just have to deal with the sausage that gets made, it's basically potato?
It's too early to tell. I think elections will have a huge play on that, and see when the official leaders are announced for all the parties. I think it's too early to tell, but I think from a manufacturer perspective, I think the people I foresee are going to fill those roles are going to be great allies again, and I think it'll be similar to what we've seen last year.
So no change.
We'll see.
We'll see. Yeah, wait and see. So you said that they work together, which I assume has to be to some degree true. But why is it that it just seems so acrimonious in public? I mean, for those of us that pay modest amounts of attention, and so you get your social media clips and the pictures in the newspaper, and occasionally you hear the news in the background and the talking heads, and you might imagine that it's like like some play where one set's got knives on one side, the other set got knives on the other side, and acrimonious at best, and just sort of like how can anything positive happen? Because it doesn't seem like people are talking past each other instead of to each other.
And I think you're going to find that when you're really passionate on an issue, it takes a while. It takes a minute for you to be able to listen to the other opposition. I think that happens to everyone. But I think ultimately these legislators have been working together for a long time. And so in the media, they're going to tell you how they truly feel. And I think that's fair. But I think they're still able to sit into a room together and try and work together, even if, their ideals don't match.
And so this whole thing out in the public is just sort of like we're just seeing the explosion, but we are not privy to the fact that after the initial reaction, this cooler heads tend to prevail-ish.
I can't tell you that I think it's a 50-50 dynamic when you get in there because there is a party in power. But I do think that once they get their statements out there into the press, they are able to come into a room and really hash out what they can agree on and see what they can put in place.
So before we kind of move over to our rapid fire round of questions, you did mention before we got this thing started that you had some questions you wanted to ask me. And yep. I'm just never been on the other side of this lobbyist situation. And I had at one point in time dreamed of being a lawyer, and no disrespect, I'm very happy that I disabused myself of that before I went there. But, give it to me. What do you got?
So who's your state rep?
My state rep, I actually do know this, and I've met with him, and it's really, oh my God, he's going to be so mad that I can't remember his name right now.
Who's your state senator?
This is when so I know my state senator. I actually don't know who my state rep is.
Okay.
Fleischman was my state rep, but I think we redistricted.
Gilchrist. No,
Gilchrist. Okay.
It was a primary challenge 2 years ago.
Okay.
Jillian Gilchrist.
Okay. There you go.
So who's your state senator?
So my state senator is who I met with before, and he worked at the Connecticut Technology Council for a while, and it's really, really bothering me that I cannot remember his name. I'm super
Senator
embarrassed. Slap. That's right, Derek.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
When was the last time you were at the General Assembly?
I think I took a tour of there when I was in high school.
So I guess my next question is, when was the last time you testified on a bill?
I've never done that.
Okay.
And I've never been invited to be honest.
I am going to make sure I keep your contact information close.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I would be down to do it. Certainly, as you probably know, I'm not shy about expressing my opinion, and I have lots of them. Yeah, no, listen, I think that's a great point, right? We don't know who our state legislators and our state reps are. And the question you didn't ask, but I will answer, is why don't I know?
Yep.
And the reason I don't know, and this is going to sound very flippant, but I mean it to some degree, is like, I don't really have time to know things that aren't going to make a difference. And that's probably not true, but it is how I feel. And I think that's kind of the mountain that, I hope that you're going to climb, is to help people understand that we can make a difference. And that's why I was like really pushing you. And I know, for your own reasons, probably it's hard to kind of get into some of those specific examples. But, if I was in your shoes and I wanted to get people engaged, I would be screaming from the mountaintops, not just on the successes, but how we achieve those successes, and then be saying, here's the other successes we can do together if we do it together.
Yep.
And if I can make an impact, which I'm obviously trying to do with this podcast, maybe you'll leave here and like figure out a way to do that, which is to get out there and help educate those of us that care about business and care about manufacturing in Connecticut, and what we can do to actually change our view of how the legislature ignores us. And, you're right in a lot of ways, right? Like we don't often walk a mile in the other person's shoes, and it is a part-time, probably mostly thankless job. And just like we don't like it when our employees come to us and only complain, but never recognize the good things, or never even talk and make positive suggestions, or get in the boat and want to row with us, it's very disheartening. And I think when we talk about this, that's how I try and think of it. So I am trying to
Thank you for making all my points. I
you're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
I'm good like that sometimes. But coming back your way now but I do think it needs to be the role of the CMC, advocate, to help educate the community on that and shout those successes.
Yeah. No. And listen, I want to make sure that we are very clear. The CMC has great leaders who have worked countless volunteer hours to try and bring home some positive stories to their local organizations. And I want them to be the voices. I'm more here to help facilitate.
Yeah, we need more.
Yes.
Because the problem with just like help facilitate implies that facilitation's great.
Yep.
If both parties that are being facilitated have a desire to get together, and when you've now educated me that the one party who I thought never listened or really cares. And in fairness, by the way, I should say that I have talked to Derek a number of times, and he definitely does care.
Yeah.
And I haven't talked to him in a while, and shame on me. So I'm going to fix that. But I think that the writ large feeling is, are we going to do so? Is the care going to turn into action?
I can't promise success. I can't promise you that you're going to have the results you want, but I know you won't have the results you want if you don't try.
Yeah, that is 1,000% fair. That's 1,000% fair. But why do you think it feels like, well, it's going to end and now I'm getting heated up again? Why does it? I think it feels like to people in the business community that, like, I don't know if it's labor. I don't know if it's whatever, but like the other side, whatever that is just like got this vice grip that seems to choke out anything else that comes through. And maybe, yeah.
So let's be really honest.
Please.
You're right. Labor often is on the other side of the issues, but they bring up people. They bring up a lot of people. So we can't combat that if we're too scared to talk to our legislators, because we're not going to make change. Because I'm telling you, they're not just saying, oh, I'm going to do this because of labor, because labor shows up. And not only do they show up with people.
Yeah, and have their points. This is why you just don't want to get into an argument with a lobbyist. So listen, then no, that makes a ton of sense, right? But then isn't it primarily your job not to just be a mediator or a convener, but to be an educator, to help educate your clients on how they can be impactful? And what are we doing to move that needle?
Well, that's why I'm here. No, I think to your point, it's fair. And I try and make sure that I'm available to anyone who needs me. But when the clients aren't in the building, my job is to make sure that their points are there. But I'm never going to replace that dynamic.
Well, no, of course not, right? Because I mean, you're the hired gun, right? And you're not, and you're one vote, right? So I mean, hopefully if our democracy works, votes matter, and the constituency matters, and constituents matter, and so that's why I sort of like stood down a little bit when you said you got to bring the people, because bringing the people does matter. So I think what we really need to do is help people see that if they do develop the relationships, if they do bring the people and they do testify, they'll have success. And so I think I'm all in on buying into your approach.
Great.
But then let's get the approach working.
Yep.
And then let's shout from the mountaintops the successes that we have. And I know we brought up, and I think I stood you down on bringing up the Colin Cooper thing. And I'm a huge Colin Cooper fan. But pre-show, in fairness, you brought it up to me, and I was like, listen, we can't keep riding that horse forever.
But I think we need to, because
go ahead.
that's a budgetary ask, right? We had to ask a state who's saying no to human service agencies all the time to put some money set aside the budget for someone to represent manufacturers. So that was not an easy win. That was a win where we were combating on a budget cycle. And I tell everyone, please don't ask me to do budget stuff, because that's the hardest thing, because there's so many competing interests and they're all great interests, right? So I think it's important to acknowledge, while Colin Cooper is the win we're talking about, that it was a good win and it was a hard win for the CMC. And I think it was really us pulling together and getting bodies in the building. I think I had 13 people testifying on that hearing about the need for it.
Listen,
it's great.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And here's the other piece why it is great, and why I did bring it up again, because I did want to get it more on the record, because I know I poo-pooed it pre and you kind of poo-pooed it during because of that probably. But it is also the gift that keeps on giving.
Yep.
Because to your point, which is having a voice is the most important thing. And so having somebody in the building who works there, who's getting paid every day to watch the sausage getting made, who can help influence not just the policy, but the implementation. And anybody who pays attention to politics on any level, local, your town, state, federal, we all know that the law and the rules that are made is one thing, but the implementation is really where it matters. And so having somebody in there at the implementation level matters.
Yeah.
And who cares about manufacturing, and not just cares about it, but was a manufacturer and has been there and done it.
And that was another big thing, is we wanted to make sure if we were going to create this position, we aren't just going to create it to some person who has no idea what the manufacturing community is facing. So I think it was a longer process than people think, and it was a great one.
Yeah. And listen, I'm a huge fan. So he is a dynamic, well-spoken, educated, experienced, and in it person. I mean, This guy's he's run a successful business. I mean, he does not have to work, but his passion for this state and for this industry is apparent, not just in what he says and how he feels, but his actions. And that's where it really matters.
He's been a great asset.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So I think we're going to go to rapid fire round of questions now. Melissa, how you feeling? You good? You going to breathe now? Yeah. She goes, I got you all worked up before this thing, but it went well.
It went very well.
All right, here we go. So rapid fire round of questions. As I tell people, there are right and wrong answers.
Great.
All right, here we go. Red Sox or Yankees?
Red Sox.
Yes. Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts?
Starbucks.
When you take time off, and not COVID, so we take that out of here, but when you take time off, you a staycation or exotic destination kind of gal?
Is Cape Cod staycation?
That's pretty staycation.
Okay.
I wouldn't call that exotic. Yeah, staycation. Nice place though. iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Sports car or SUV?
What do I want or what do I have?
What's you? What's the true?
Sports
what's
car.
your inner self?
Sports car.
There we go. If you had to do something other than be a lobbyist, and it literally could be anything in the whole entire world, what would you do?
An event planner.
An event planner. There you go. Do you have a favorite business book?
Not at the moment.
Favorite book?
I have a lot of them. I'm terrible with that. Don't ask me books or names or anything.
What's something, Melissa, that you learned early in your career or early in your life that you think's propelled you to the success that you've had?
I think to say no as little as possible and to always put yourself out there.
And what's something that you learned later in your career or later in your life that if you went and talked to young Melissa and she listened to you, it'd have a real positive impact on her life?
I think it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn from them.
That's a great one. I absolutely love it. We're going to leave it there. Melissa, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you for all the work you're doing on behalf of manufacturers in Connecticut. I look forward to working with you, and I hope we have even more success in the future.
Great. Thanks so much for your time.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by IT Direct.
As always, thank you so much for tuning in and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a community where we can learn and grow together. Your input, feedback, and engagement is critical to making that happen. Please do comment, like, and subscribe so more and more people can hear what we're doing and join our community of growth and success. Thanks so much for tuning in. Talk to you again soon.